And of course, as soon as we go live, he drops call. One sec here. Let me get him back on the line here. Hey, you're back.
Hi, Don.
Hey, okay.
I'm back. I don't know what's going on.
As soon as I go live, you drop the call. That's the story of my life.
I don't
literally. That's okay, man.
Sorry.
It's all good, man. We're running NDI, so it actually picks up the camera, so it's kind of nice. Anyways, guys, hello. Hopefully you can hear me. Hopefully you can hear Ozzy. We'll do a quick check like usual because I'm using slobs again, and I don't know what it is about slobs. It hit or miss whether it works. But anyways, Ozzy, welcome back. Say hi to everybody, and maybe they can hear you. Maybe they can't. I don't know.
Hello, everyone. Hope you can hear me.
So can you guys hear? Oh, there's echo? Okay, let me fix that. That's why I asked because... All right, that may get rid of the echo, but then I'm not quite sure if it cuts Ozzy off. So, 1, 2, 3. Let me know if there's echo, and then Ozzy will say something here, and let me know if he is good to go. They say they can still hear you, but you're not saying anything.
Testing, 1, 2, 3.
All right, so there you go. If you guys can hear him, then we'll be good to go, and we'll get into the topic tonight. There's always that delay, you got that delay between asking the live chat and then seeing if they can actually hear everything just fine. All right, so yeah, looks like they're good to go. So anyways, tonight, the echo's on me? This is why I need a producer. Where's Bullinator? He has all this high-end stuff. I don't see why I have an echo. I literally have only one feed coming in. Let me try one other thing. All right, so that's the only thing I think that could possibly get rid of the echo. Hopefully, it doesn't get rid of Ozzy though. So let me try one more time. Bullinator, do I got an echo still? And Ozzy, does he have an echo?
Can you hear me? Am I echoing?
All right, it's better for me, but let's see if they can hear you.
All right, I'll count to 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Sounds like you got a fan on too. Is that Scotch?
It is.
Nice. Single malt?
Yeah, Auchentoshan.
Neat.
Neat. I always drink it neat.
You're the man. All right, everybody's good to go. Yeah, I've been drinking Johnny Walker Black. So good. Neat. Some of the other kinds of scotches I got to put like a drop of water in or two, but this is just smooth. It's awesome. But anyways, guys, tonight we're going to be talking about a post that I made on Facebook. I put it in some various groups. Somebody had asked me, can you kind of summarize a few things? And I said... yeah, I'd be happy to. So I made a 3-point summary, and I tagged Ozzy and Stephen Hoyt in it, and Ozzy had some things to add to it and kind of clarify a little bit. At first, it's weird, Ozzy. Whenever we get a post analysis from you, half the time we go, man, how bad? How bad did I screw this up? Right? Is Ozzy going to just rip us apart on this, or? But I don't think you were tearing me up on it. I think you're just clarifying, right?
Yeah. Well, I was expressing essentially what you were saying, but I was putting it in my own words and in a way that I thought would be a little bit more conversational without like you were getting a little bit technical. Stephen Hoyt was very technical, and I thought I would sort of try to make it more accessible to a lay audience who's not familiar with speech act theory, not familiar with formal logic and that sort of stuff.
Okay. That's kind of the way I interpreted it, but I wasn't sure. Anyways, I'm boosting your audio up a little bit. Hopefully they can hear you better now. You got a weird sound in the background, like a fan.
The only thing I can think of is the fridge in the kitchen, but it's not that loud. So
it's weird when I boost you up. It does that. So all right, I'm gonna keep you about here so it doesn't get too much of a gain. Hopefully they can hear you just fine. Again, I don't know what it is with Slobs. Slobs has the weirdest audio levels. So, all right. But anyways, let's kind of jump into it, and hopefully it'll be okay. I'm going to screen share with you guys what I wrote, and then Ozzy and I can kind of go through it. I also have it up on the screen here too. So, let's see here. All right. So, when I start off with this, Ozzy, I wanted to relate to people. Basically, how propositions work, how dispositions work towards a proposition, how an epistemic status works toward a proposition. Now, I'm looking at it from my perspective, and I'm not saying that everybody has to kind of look at it this way. What I'm saying is this is what's normative to me. And so if you want to weigh onto this, when I'm reading a paper, when I'm reading something, when I read something like to deny the proposition, to reject the proposition, to believe the proposition's false, to accept the proposition is litigation, whatever the terms are, to me, I don't see any distinction between them as far as what one is saying illocution-wise. Okay, so when I say I deny P, I am saying that I accept the negation of P.
Yeah. All right. Ordinarily, when people say that they deny or they reject something, they are saying more than merely that they don't believe it. They are repudiating, they are accepting the contrary. Right? That's almost always what you mean, right? To deny something is to say no. It's not to say I'm not convinced. It's to say no. It's a denial. And a rejection is just that. It's a repudiation. It's not merely failure to accept a claim. It is to affirm the opposite. And this gets a little confusing in connection with the whole not believing something, right? In connection with this whole definition of atheism and lack of belief and all that. Whenever people say that they don't believe something, it's unclear what they're saying. Right? When you say I don't believe, it might merely mean that you lack a belief. Right? It might not necessarily mean that you believe the contrary, that you believe that what they've just said is false. You're not necessarily asserting falsehood, right? You might merely be expressing that you are unpersuaded. That's certainly possible, right? But think of all the times that you have said, I don't believe that in your life, right? In my response, I gave the example that supposing you came up to me, Steve, and you said, hey, Ozzy, did you hear? Trump just took an IQ test, and he scored the highest IQ score ever. Right? Now, supposing upon hearing that I said, I don't believe that for a minute, right? Do you think that I'm just saying I lack a belief, or am I saying I think that's false, right? Very often, in fact, most of the time when we say I don't believe that, what we're saying is more than we lack a belief. We're saying that we think it is false, right? And that's because when you utter a sentence, right? When you engage in a speech act, an act of speech, okay, there's different actions that you can take with speech. Some of the things you can say can be descriptive, they can be questions, they can be interrogative, they can be directives, that is, they can be instructions or orders, they can be promises. There's all these speech acts that you can perform. Assertion is one of them. But when you assert something, there's different ways that you can do things, different ways that you can assert. Right? You can assert something directly or indirectly. So there are what are called direct speech acts and indirect speech acts. Okay. So supposing I said to you, what time is it? I ask you that question. That's a question. That's not an assertion. It's just a question. All right. What time is it? Okay. That's it's an interrogative. It's a pure question. Right. And it's intended to be a question, right? But I could also walk up to you and say, Steve, do you know the time? That too is a question. It's a yes/no question. But what is my intended question?
To right? know the time, not whether if I know the time or not.
Right. That is both an interrogative and it is a directive. It's a request to tell me the time. So if I walked up to you and I said, hey, Steve, do you know the time? And you said, yeah, I do. Yeah, I know the time, Ozzy. And then you just climbed up or walked away. I think, geez, well, you're being a smartass, right? Because clearly you understand that that was an indirect speech act, right? The locution, what I said, the words coming out of my mouth was a question. But the illocution, the intended meaning of that question, right, was a request, okay? Now, you can be very, very literal-minded in life and construe things in a very lawyer-like fashion with a literal interpretation of the words, but then you're not going to understand most of what goes on around you, right? That's not how we proceed, right? According to Speech Act theory, many of our direct assertions and direct questions are in fact indirect. We're actually saying something else. We're asking something else. We're promising something else than what our words would imply. Okay. So, for instance, if I said, here's a question. If I said to my kid, my teenager, could you please clean your room? That's not a question either. It sounds like a question, right? The direct locution is a question, but the indirect illocution, the intended meaning is clean your damn room, right? I'm telling you to clean your room. Okay? Well, it's the same thing with saying I don't believe. I don't believe can literally mean I lack belief, right? But most of the time when people say I don't believe, most of the time when they say I don't believe, what they're saying is I believe that's false. So if you tell me that Donald Trump scored the highest IQ score ever on an IQ test, I'm going to say I don't believe that. Now, what I mean by that is I think it's false.
How does one distinguish that? I totally agree with you on all this, trust me. But how does one make that distinguishment between those two without having the if you have the Prelocution Act, and let me explain for the audience here. So you have illocution, locution, and perlocution, or any of the order. So a locution is basically what you're saying, what your actual words are saying. The illocution is the intended meaning, and the perlocution is the effect upon the listener. Which, right. In this particular case, if you don't believe something, they could do what's called negation raising and raise that to a state of actual having a belief of some kind, right? So how do you know when somebody says, like, I don't believe Trump got the highest IQ? They're merely just saying, I don't believe, or they're actually trying to convey to the listener through an illocutionary act that they believe Trump doesn't have, didn't score very well on an IQ test.
Well, there's no certain criteria for this. There's no necessary and sufficient conditions for distinguishing when a person's illocutionary intended meaning differs from the locution, right? So if you tell me, hey, Ozzy, a buddy of mine went camping and he says he saw Bigfoot, and I said, I don't believe that, right? It could be that I merely failed to believe, but I'm completely undecided and agnostic. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. But it's also possible that I think that's bullshit. I just don't believe it, and I am, as you said, negation raising. I am saying I don't believe, but what I mean by I don't believe is that I believe that it is false. Because one of the ways of saying I think something is false is to say that I don't believe it.
Right. So what about
so there's no test. It's context dependent, right? The context usually disambiguates it, right? So for instance, if I said, I'm not sure I believe that. Okay, well there you're not going to go assuming that I think it's false, because I have by the tone of my voice, my inflection, the fact that I qualified it with I'm not sure that I believe, right? I qualified the lack of belief with I'm not sure that I believe that. That makes me sound very agnostic on the question, open to it. That really does sound like
I do the same thing when I say I'm not. I'll say something like, "Well, I'm not sure that I agree with you on that."
Sometimes. Right.
Yeah, same thing.
Right. But if I were to say, I don't believe that for a second, well, now clearly, right? I mean, unless you really are obtuse or you're just not familiar with the language, you're not fluent in the language, you really ought to be assuming that that's negation raising, that I am in fact negating it and affirming the opposite. I am fully denying it, fully rejecting it, accepting the opposite. Saying it's false.
Do you find though? I've noticed a pattern with certain individuals, no names or anything like that, but I mean in general, that there's a group of people that generally, for some, and it's usually maybe along the lines of being on the spectrum, or just because they're just very fastidious in how they use grammar. But do you see a lot of people, they'll take the locution and take it as gospel, that is the only sense that it could possibly be interpreted from. They will not even entertain any kind of other locutionary meaning behind it. And I think that leads to a lot of trouble and a lot of discord, because you have people that are so fixated on the actual locution that they think they don't take into account nuance and context and a bunch of other things, and it leads to some pretty brutal wildfires and dumpster fires on Twitter that I've seen. I've seen this happen quite frequently.
Yeah, well, that's what I was talking about, was the kind of literal mindedness that some people have, right?
You said that. That's what you had to mean by it. Well, no.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Well, those were your exact words. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you could say, well, wait a minute. I mean, I clarified. Yes, I realized there's an ambiguity because I was using an indirect speech act. It would help if everybody sort of, when they went through high school, was taught about the distinction between direct speech acts, direct assertions, and indirect assertions, direct questions and indirect questions, right? We speak indirectly all the time, and when we're speaking indirectly, it sounds like we're saying one thing, but we're in fact saying another thing, and it's perfectly plain to anybody. But when in an argument, that's when a person can tend to get uncharitable, right? And then suddenly they will feign confusion. Well, you said this. How could I possibly have understood you to mean anything else? You know, look, let's not pretend that you don't understand what an indirect speech act is. If there was some genuine confusion, here, I've gone to the trouble of disambiguating it. Now you know. So don't try to hold me to something that you thought I said when I have disambiguated it for you, right? It would be helpful if everybody sort of had this distinction pickled into them much earlier in life, because then it wouldn't be so easy to sort of pull that on people, right? And that's what people do. They pull this. They pretend that that you don't know how to use the language, when in fact someone who fails to recognize the reality and relevance and ubiquity of indirect speech acts is the person who's in fact exposing themselves as having an insensitivity to language and how we exercise it.
Yeah, I see that a lot. Like I said, I'll ask for clarifications. If there's any kind of amphibly or any kind of ambiguity, I'll ask, hey, what do you mean by reject? What do you mean by deny? Because you'll see these in these conversations quite some time. I deny God exists, or I reject theism. I have a hard time knowing what they mean by it, right? I use these terms very specifically. I know what I mean by them. Most papers I'll read the same thing. But in everyday kind of context, it's very confusing of what they mean by these terms, because they throw them out there with such, I don't know what the word would be, flippant. Just, I reject that. Well, what do you mean by reject that? Are you saying that you accept the negation, or you just don't accept it? Give me a little bit of meaning behind it, because they're so used to hearing things like, oh, atheism is just like, atheism is just a denial of this. Okay, but what do you mean by that?
Yeah, I get that all the time. The difficulty is this. The words I deny, I reject, I don't accept, right? They can all be construed in a weak form and in a strong form, right? Now, typically, words like reject and repudiate and deny, we usually reserve those for the strong form, right? But they don't have to be used that way, right? I mean, there's always some flexibility.
Yeah, I can say I can reject something to mean I not accept. I mean, it depends on what rejectionism you use, whether there's different conventions for that. I've seen both. I tend to use rejection to accept negation, because that's generally what I think is normative. But if somebody says, well, I say I reject your job offer, you're saying that I'm not accepting your job offer, he was rejected for the job. He was that. Right. So in that case, it makes sense to use it in a different sense. Right.
Yeah.
But logically, almost every single time I've ever seen rejection used, or disbelief, or deny, it's been with the acceptance of the negation.
Right. Yeah.
And by the way, I say Frege in this, that now they'll have a little bit of a difference when they're talking about the disposition towards the proposition with the belief of the negation itself. This is what Hoyt starts to get into very technical things on, which I'm not really that interested in. I'm fascinated to have him come on and explain it, but it gets bogged down in the weeds too much for me. But if you ever wanted to go on with Hoyt and try to break it down, by all means, but I think it's very myopic that he gets into. But I do understand the distinctions. Right? This is why I've said to you before, why I'll say that beliefs are claims, but I'm using it very loosely, because a belief is a disposition, the claim is the propositional content itself.
Right. Okay, well, maybe we should say a little bit about that,
sure.
About sort of what a belief is, okay? Because people get a little confused about belief sometimes, and they people get sort of, they'll say, I believe that, but I didn't say that. But I'm not asserting it, or I'm not affirming it.
Yeah,
or
that's
I'm not,
weird.
I'm not claiming that. Right now, okay, when you believe something, it's to say that you believe something is true or you believe something is false, right? So I can believe something to be true, I can believe something to be false. Okay, so what is a belief? Okay, and a lot of people are allergic, especially in the skeptical movement. That I don't think they should be, but a lot of people are, and in the atheist movement, this is sort of almost endemic now, where people are allergic to the word belief, and they'll say, I don't have any beliefs. I don't believe in evolution. I know that evolution is true. Or I don't believe in evolution. I merely accept the facts of evolution, or I accept evolution as a fact. Now, what we mean by a belief is that you accept something as a fact. That's what it is to believe something. To have a belief is to take something to be true. It's to think that something is the case. Whatever you think is the case, that's your belief, right? A belief has to have truth conditions. That there has to be some state of affairs, right, that answers to your belief if your belief is to be true. To have a true belief is to say that there is something that corresponds to your belief. Okay, so if I say I believe the cat is on the mat, but that belief is true, that is the condition of satisfaction on that belief is that there is a cat on the mat. If there is no cat on the mat, if there's no cat, if there's no mat, or if there's a cat in the mat but the cat's not on the mat, if those conditions are not met, those conditions of satisfaction are not met, then the belief isn't true. Okay, so a belief has a content. Okay, the content is different from the belief. The belief is a disposition. It is a state of mind. It's an attitude that you have towards that proposition. The proposition being the cat is on the mat. There are many attitudes or dispositions that you can have towards one and the same proposition. So let's take the cat is on the mat again. That's the proposition, that the cat is on the mat. That's the proposition. Well, I can believe it. Well, what does it mean to say that I believe it? It's to say that I regard that proposition as true. But consider this. I could also hope the cat is on the mat. I hope the cat is on the mat. Now, that doesn't mean I believe that the cat is on the mat. It just, I want it to be true.
It's a different dispositional state.
Exactly. I can also say I fear that the cat is on the mat. I can also say I wish the cat were on the mat. Okay.
I want the cat on the mat.
Yeah. If I wish the cat were on the mat, clearly, if I wish it to be true, by implication, I don't believe it to be true. I want it to be true.
Right.
But the reason I want it to be true is because I don't think it is. Right. There are all these attitudes that you can have towards a proposition. I can believe the cat is on the mat. I can fear the cat is on the mat. I can hope the cat is on the mat. I can dread that the cat is on the mat. I can regret the cat is on the mat. I can, there's all these attitudes that you can have towards that proposition. Okay, some of which imply that they're true. Okay, if I say I fear the cat is, I'm afraid because the cat is on the mat. Okay, that implies that I think the cat is on the mat. Otherwise, I wouldn't be afraid. If I say I'm afraid because the cat is on the mat, that presupposes the cat is on the mat. So fearing that the cat is on the mat, not an anticipatory fear, but an actual fear. Like I am presently afeared because the cat is on the mat. That is a propositional attitude. That is an attitude towards the proposition that assumes that the proposition is true. It entails a belief. So some attitudes towards a proposition entail a belief. Okay. If I say I wish it were the case that the cat is on the mat, that does not assume that I think that cat is on the mat. On the contrary, it assumes that I think the cat isn't on the mat, but that I wish that it were. I wish that things were other than they were. That assumes that I think the cat is not on the mat. Mm-hmm. That is a propositional attitude, right? That affirms the opposite truth claim, the opposite propositional content, that the cat is not on the mat. And of course, a belief in the cat is on the mat is affirming the state of affairs.
Well, and those would be two ontological states, whether the cat is either on the mat or the cat is not on the mat. So right. If you believe the cat is on the mat, you think that's the corresponding case. And if you wish it was on the mat, you could infer that you think it's the opposite of that. Right,
yeah. Now, if I say to you, I promise the cat is on the mat, okay, now what I'm saying is I am assuring you that the cat is on the mat. I'm not just saying that it's my belief. I'm assuring you that the cat is on the mat. If I say I promise the cat will be on the mat, I'm not guaranteeing that the cat's on the mat now, but I'm telling you that it will be.
But right? Is there a necessary entailment there, or is that just an implicature?
Well,
if I say
it's an implicature.
it's implicature, because I could
it's
probably think
implicature.
of a case where you can say I promised the cat is on the mat, but maybe not hold to that belief. I don't know.
Yeah, well, you
Weird
can lie.
things
We're
that
talking but we're talking in all of these cases. We're talking about sincere speech.
okay.
acts.
We're talking about
Right.
we're going to take the principle that people are honest agents here.
Yeah, well, I mean, sometimes people aren't. They're lying, right? But the capacity to lie, to tell a false promise, to misdescribe a state of affairs, right? To misdescribe your own mental state and stuff. All of those are predicated on acceptance that generally people are telling the truth. I mean, most of the time people tell the truth. If everyone was lying 90% of the time,
Yeah, well,
nobody.
Well, if everybody lied, then it wouldn't. It'd be
exactly.
Yeah,
Our words would our words wouldn't work,
Yeah.
right? You couldn't in fact get by in the world by talking to people, because they would be so reliably unreliable that there would be no point.
Well, this is why
in extracting information.
This is why I hold that word liar to a very special status, because people use everybody lies. Well, of course, people have white lies. People white lie to save people's feelings. I mean, I think it's virtuous to have a white lie to save somebody's feelings. You don't go to a cancer ward and they say, "Are you going to die?" You go, "Yeah, you know what? You're about 15 minutes out from you tend to soften the blows." I think that's an honorable thing to do in some cases. But when people say, "Well, everybody's a liar," then if that's the case, how do you have a functional society? You can never have any kind of duties with anybody. You can never have any compacts with anybody. You can never have any trust with anybody if everybody lies. It wouldn't make any sense to say the word liar. If I say, "Hey, Ozzy, let's go to the movies," and you say, "Why do you want me to go to the movies?" And I say, "Oh, I just want to hang out with you." But yet, what I'm trying to do is keep you away from going home where they're having a surprise birthday party for you. Yeah, technically it's a lie, but it's virtuous in nature. But does that make me a liar? No. We have that word liar for a reason.
Yeah, I mean, the word liar has to be reserved not for people who tell white lies or who tell lies to spare somebody's feelings, or someone who lies to you about where they're taking you when in fact they're taking you to your surprise birthday party, and they're lying to you all day long about what's going on and where your friends are and stuff like that, right? I mean, you thank that person at
I was trying to say, I took you to the movies so they get ready for your surprise birthday party, if that wasn't clear.
Right, exactly, yeah. We reserve the word liar for someone who is a habitual liar, right? Or who lies for all the wrong reasons, for purely selfish reasons, right? Either get their ass out of hot water, or just to save some embarrassment, or to gain some advantage over another person, or to exploit your credulity or something like that for their own selfish ends, right? But someone who tells a lie on your behalf to make your day go a little bit softer, and make you feel better when you're blue or something like that. That's not what we're worried about. We're worried about pernicious lies. But what's interesting about the whole concept of lying, though, is that the efficacy of lying only works because most of the time, all of us are just telling the truth, right? I mean, people probably lie every day, but and I don't know that everybody lies every day, but a lot of people lie every day. So there's no shortage of lies out there, right? But they are vastly outnumbered by the number of mundane true expressions and true sentences, and that's for the same reason that counterfeit money wouldn't work if all the money were counterfeit, right? Counterfeit money can only work, can only pass in an economy where most of the bills are legit and are not counterfeit or genuine. And I mean, I remember someone asking me, like, well, what's the moral principle that tells you that lying is wrong? I don't need a moral principle. I don't need a God or anything like that telling me that lying is wrong. The reason we think lying is wrong is simply that discourse necessitates that most of our utterances be true. Truth-telling is required for just ordinary intelligibility. It's a condition of intelligibility, in fact, that most of our utterances be true. Because if most of the sentences coming out of everybody's mouths were false, we would just stop talking to each other, because you would be deluding yourself if you acted on any of that, or you'd have to simply disregard almost everything that you hear because it was inveterately false. So there's it's a condition of intelligibility on any language that most of the people's utterances in that language are telling the truth. That is, are at least trying to tell the truth, or at least being sincere. They can be factually wrong, but being mistaken is not the same thing as lying. right? So sincerity is a condition of intelligibility, and that's why we value truth-telling, and that's why we disapprove of liars, but it's why we tolerate a certain amount of lying, because some small amount of lying, when it's not done for selfish gain, is understood to not threaten intelligibility in any way. It just doesn't get in our way. It just isn't a problem.
Yeah, I think there's a vast distinction to be had there, especially when there is pernicious lies that you see people do quite frequently. They have a reputation of just constantly not being forthright. And I think that's the primary consideration. If you ask somebody something and they're not being forthright with information, they're obviously being deceptive. They want to give out willfully wrong or incorrect or untrue information. That's what I consider to be in the lying category.
Right.
And what I think people do, I think there's certain people for some reason that want to actually look for the worst. They want to, like, the least principle of charity. They'll look for any inconsistency rather than trying to understand the reasoning by the statements when there's like the illocutionary act of it. And they what I've seen happen is people have to actually, and this is what goes on all the time with other people that I've seen is causing drama with friends like I know that I'm just trying to stay out of, but one person will say one thing, the other person will say something, and then neither one of them really is lying, but they're kind of looking at each other thinking that both of them are lying because they're just kind of misreading each other, right?
Yeah.
They're looking for anything they can latch onto to say there's an inconsistency there. But when you read stuff in context on the one part and you read stuff in context from the other person, it makes sense, but they're not reading it that way with each other. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. Well, the principle of charity is really indispensable in discourse. There was a fellow, H.P. Grice. He's a analytic philosopher. He was sort of in the well, actually, he's part of the Speech Act school. He was interested in pragmatics, and he had these 4 rules. I forget what they were now. These 4 principles of pragmatics. But basically, he said in any interaction, in any linguistic interaction between two people, there are certain things that are operative that make it possible, that make communication possible, right? So one of them was relevance. You know, if I ask you a question, the answer that you give me has to be relevant. You can't be answering something else entirely. Okay, but relevance is tricky. So supposing I said. Supposing we're investigating a murder or something, and I say, well, what do you think? Do you think the butler did it? Or no, never mind the butler. Supposing I said, who do you think did it? We know that someone in the staff in this estate is the likely murderer. Who do you think did it? And you say, well, the butler has an alibi. Now, is that an answer to my question? Well, not directly, but you are understanding that my intention is to try to figure out who is responsible. And part of the way to get at who is responsible is to eliminate who isn't responsible for the crime. So you are answering my question, right? This is, again, this idea of direct and indirect speech acts, right? So what you said there was relevant, right? But on the surface, it seems to not be answering my question, because my question is, who did it, right? And you say, well, it can't have been the butler. The butler has a perfect alibi, okay? So you did answer my question, but in a certain sense, at a surface level, you didn't answer my question at all, right? But clearly your answer is relevant, so you've satified the relevancy condition. Another one is like, what was the other one, Grace? He said
maximum quantity, maximum quality.
Quantity.
Yeah,
right.
I mean, you're talking about maxims, right?
Yeah, that's right. There were 4 maxims, and one of them was quantity. Yeah. So if I say, hey, we're going to a movie tonight. We're going to go see such and such. What are the show times? Okay. And you start giving me, and I say, I want to know all of the show times for, Avengers Endgame or something like that. And you start listing all of the show times all over the world, right? That's just too much information, yeah. Okay? And it's probably not relevant because we're probably not going to jet all around the world to see all of the movie. So you're violating 2 maxims, relevance, and you're just giving me too much information.
Yeah, he had the 4 maxims of the maximum of quantity, maximum of quality, maximum of relation, and maximum manner, which is to be clear, brief, and orderly as you can. To avoid ambiguity and obscurity. Yeah, I love these maxims.
Well, I violate the brevity one all the time. I'm
yes,
doing
you do.
it right now. sorry. I forgive my verbosity. But the point is that all of these amount to cooperation, right? When you are talking to people, you are cooperating. It's kind of like being on a seesaw. You can't be playing on a seesaw or a teeter-totter by yourself and having a good time, right? When two people are on a teeter-totter, it requires cooperation. When one person's up in the air and the other person goes down, they bend their legs, they go down nice and low, and then they push with their legs to go up and bring the other person down. It's like dancing. It requires cooperation, and conversation requires cooperation, right? Now you can play games, you can mess around on a teeter-totter, right? You can throw your legs out, you can kick off too hard and bring the other person crashing down. Or when they're way up in the air, you can just hop off the teeter-totter and have them fall violently from a height. There's all kinds of ways that you can crash that game, and it's the same thing in conversation. And the easiest way to crash a conversation is to use all of these conversation-stopping moves, right? To be uncharitable, to interpret a person in the most literal way, and then hold them to it.
And that's when I back out of the conversation, though. I mean, 9 times out of 10, this is what I have happened to me personally, and I just back out and go, I'm done. Now, people say that, oh, well, Steve's between you an isolated, echo chamber, or Steve's not addressing bliss. I'm like, I'd not. If somebody else doesn't have principle of charity with me, I'm just not going to be interested in that conversation for that very reason. It's just nothing that I want to talk about with anybody.
Yeah, well, I tend to back out very quickly out of conversations when I sense that the person isn't being an honest interlocutor.
Right.
And that doesn't mean that they have to agree with me or anything like that. But I mean, if I sense that they're throwing up the shields and they're obfuscating, they're playing hide the ball with what their beliefs are, they're being too literal-minded. If they're feigning, they're pretending not to know the difference between a direct and an indirect speech act. Even they're not going to know that expression necessarily, but they understand the distinction.
Concept,
Everyone makes that distinction, right? And if they play this game of holding you to something that you said when you've gone to the trouble of clarifying it and disambiguating it, and they still hold you to it,
that's dishonest. It's just dishonest to me.
That's dishonesty, right? And so this is another failure of cooperation. You're violating these maxims that are necessary for the simple pragmatics of conversation, right? Discourse simply breaks down. And this is a way to have it break down. This is one of the reasons why the philosophy of language is so important, because you don't really learn this in linguistics, right? Things like pragmatics, linguistic pragmatics, you don't really learn in a course in linguistics. It tends to be more technical and structural in nature. But something like speech act theory, I think, sort of drills down right to the level that we're interested in why conversations fail, what makes them succeed, the kinds of games that people play. I mean, if you want to understand the kinds of games that people play in conversations, study some speech act theory. It's not an area of the philosophy of language that is specifically devoted to game playing and how it works. But once you understand speech act theory, you can really see a lot of game playing going on, and then you will find yourself, you'll catch yourself doing it, going, oh shoot, that is just. I've done that. That's stupid. That's a conversation stopping move that I'm.
Well, I think everybody's probably in somewhere down the line taking things too literally, and probably ungraciously. I'm sure. I lose my patience sometimes when people that I have no doubt have no principle of charity. I might respond in kind and not have principle of charity for them either, and do exactly what they're doing to me. But I usually make note of it. I don't try to do it dishonestly. I at least tell them, hey, if you're gonna have no principle of charity for me, I'm not gonna have it for you either. But the thing that I've noticed the most is that, for example, like the other day, I had asked a simple question. I really can't stand when people can't answer simple questions. I'm not. This thing. If you think I'm trying to confuse somebody or I'm trying to play a gotcha game by answering simple questions, you're not an honest interlocutor with me. You're not giving me any principle of charity at that point, and I have no reason to have a discussion with you, right? But I'll see it quite frequently. But I'll ask this very simple question because we're talking about beliefs. Do you believe that I exist? This is not a complicated question. It can be simple as, yes, I believe that you exist, or no, I do not believe that you exist. And if you answer no, I'd like to know why. We can just kind of suss that out a little bit. But that question does not require a long expository answer. It can be answered very simply. And yet I have a lot of people that refuse to answer this very simple type of questions. And I'll ask them 3 or 4 times. And after that, I'm done. Why spend the time trying to have a person in a discussion, in a dialectic where you're trying to come up with some kind of mutual finding of truth between you two, and yet he's not even going to give you the respect of to think, okay, is this guy trying to trick me or not? I'm not trying to trick anybody when I'm asking simple questions. What I'm trying to do is go to a core thing about why you hold or do not hold a particular belief, and I cannot do that if people don't answer these questions. And so it's very frustrating because they think you're playing a game of gotcha.
Yeah, I don't have much to add to that. I mean, it's exactly what happens.
I'm sure you've seen it happen to you too, probably. I'm sure.
Well, it happens to everyone. It happens to me. It happens to other people. I'm very quick to sort of back off when I see that. I just don't see much point in pursuing it. And if I see that a person is in the habit of doing it, then I'll usually just not bother talking to them. Again, and I would never try to tell people you shouldn't talk to that person, because just because I can't have a productive discussion with a person doesn't mean that somebody else shouldn't try or isn't capable of doing so. But there are certain people that, in the great debate community, for instance, that I have just written off and have never bothered talking to because, the first few times I've had interactions with them, I just kept bumping into these kinds of roadblocks, and then I noticed that there's a pattern. They tend to do that a lot.
I'm in the same boat, and I mean, we're not going to go into any names, but it's just like there's certain people that I'm just not going to have conversations with. It's not that I don't like them. It's not that I have anything against them. It's that I just know from past experience and years of them having these discussions, there's no possible way, one, that they understand any of it, and two, that they add anything to the discourse. And they're just obfuscating everything. Everything is taken uncharitably. That's not how I'm going to have a dialogue. And they haven't learned. The worst part is I've seen people that in the great debate for a long time that have pontificated on many different things. And in all those years, they still have never gone out of the way to actually read anything on these topics. Nothing.
Yeah, well, let me say something, because you have a lot of critics, and I have to say,
really, that's shocking.
Yeah, and I have to say, you really have a talent. I mean, you court controversy, and you have a talent for manufacturing enemies, and I think it's in
genetics.
I think it's more. I think it's more the way you conduct yourself in when you're typing. I think you're quite different in person, but.
I've always said that, though.
you're very curt and very brusque, and seem very short. And you're more given to lashing out, giving a person a tongue lashing in print than when you're talking. But one thing that I think redounds to your credit is you do look things up, and you do up your game, and you have been trying to impart what you've been learning to other people, which I'm grateful for, because, as you say, there are people who've been around the great debate community for literally a decade or more. That I've been around, and some people are just rehearsing the same old thing, and they never manage to impart anything new, and they don't seem to learn anything, right? And it's a little bit distressing. I mean, this is going to sound awfully one-sided, but I mean, I'm not only accustomed to this, but I've come to expect this from certain kinds of apologists. But I find it distressing when I hear it from people who are self-described rationalists and skeptics and pro-science boosters and so forth. Then it's really disappointing that, geez, you've been arguing about this for a long time and you've never bothered to look it up. You've never gone even to Wikipedia and looked it up. Or if you did something cursory, you just looked and you read until you found something that seemed to side with you, and then you stopped.
I've seen that. They don't lead. I've had people actually do that. They'll go, and they'll go to let's say Stanford or something, and they'll see one little paragraph that will supposedly agree with them, but they never read the next couple lines. They never go past it. And so it's kind of a bizarre thing to actually see in real time. But yeah, no, I mean, I like imparting these things. I like reading about these things. And I actually, read the papers, and that I had one person the other day say, if you ask for a citation to support your argument, you're just appealing to an authority and its authoritativeness, and it's just bordering along on, how creationists cite the Bible. I'm like, no, it's not. Like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life. Anybody who's ever been to college, when you write a paper, you do citations. There's a reason for that. You're not saying that you're correct because of the citations. You're saying, here's my argument, and here's some supporting evidence from experts that lends some credibility to what I'm trying to say here.
Yeah, okay, that's true. That's absolutely right. But I have seen you make a mistaken connection with this, where you overuse a citation.
Get out. You're done.
And no. Where you cite something and you say, look, you don't have any citations. I have citations on my side. And I think when you do that, I think people have to be forgiven for thinking that you're just pulling an argument from authority, because that isn't what it looks like.
What I tell them is, I say, if I'm at least supported by what I'm saying. Do you have anything that supports what you're saying? That's what I'm trying to do, a comparative thing.
Right. No, but if they're giving reasons for why they're doing it, then I don't think it's
with that. I'm happy with that if they do that.
Yeah. But it's not important that people have a source or citation. I mean, I've had people say, "Hey, Ozzy, you've got this view, evolutionary reliabilism. You've got this view on reliabilism and how it goes, how it blends with, virtue ethics and stuff like that. Well, who else thinks that?
Yeah, no, I'm okay with it. In some reasons, yeah, no,
in some cases, yeah, no. But the point is this.
Totally cool with that, actually.
I don't like. I shouldn't have to need a philosopher in my corner who shares all of my views. There isn't going to be one, right? And in some cases there are. Like Ernest Sosa is someone whose views line up with mine.
I ask for citations when they're making fiat statements about like philosophy. When they're making material fact statements, right? When somebody says, well, I believe this and I want to know the rationality, fine, that's not a big deal. But if somebody says, well, in philosophy it's this, okay, well then I need some kind of understanding of where they're getting that from.
Yeah, it's particularly difficult though in this arena, because a lot of people on the skeptic side are science boosters and take a very dim view of philosophy. So they harbor what is, in my view, a sharp intellectual prejudice against philosophy, because they can't see where philosophy ends and theology begins. They think that because a lot of apologists use certain philosophical arguments, the ontological argument, cosmological arguments, and stuff like that, that all philosophy is that way, that all philosophy is done in reverse. You start with your dogma, and then you try to reverse engineer an argument that leads you to your dogmas. And that is not how philosophy proceeds. I mean, that's how Oprah proceeds. That's how Deepak Chopra proceeds. They're not philosophers. They don't know the first thing about philosophy. And a lot of religious apologists who have studied philosophy, William Lane Craig springs to mind, I think is the worst of philosophers, not because he's completely ignorant or anything.
No, he's knowledgeable, but he uses it in a very dishonest way. He's very, very
right. Yeah, he's doing philosophy in reverse. He's starting with his dogmas and he's trying to confect philosophical arguments. Right? But that's not how philosophy proceeds. I mean, this is not supposed to be how philosophy proceeds. It's just like when people at Answers in Genesis try to confect a scientific case for their creationism. That's pathological science done that way. It's not real science, and we should discredit that, but we shouldn't then throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, oh well, so much for science. And I think what in this arena you're sort of up against, not just you, me, everyone who's interested in philosophy and thinks that philosophy can make important contributions in this area. We're up against this prejudice from people on the skeptic side of the fence who harbor a prejudice against philosophy, and so when you cite philosophers, they think, well, I don't regard them as experts in anything.
And they think I'm a theist.
The emperor has no clothes, right?
But they think that I'm doing the same thing that William Lane Craig's doing. They literally do.
Yeah. I know. I've gotten that myself.
Yeah, and it's bothersome. And yeah, I've seen it with other people too, and people that I know people that are anti-theists that I've had happen to. They're like, how are you saying that I'm sounding like a theist when they are actually anti-theist? And it's bizarre, because I think people have this defense mechanism, and if they don't understand the argument, or they're not really, as you said, hip to philosophy in any way, they're very much science-minded, which is great, but they don't apply real reason and critical thinking across the board, which is unfortunate. And so they hear something that is reminiscent of what might be what they would hear from an apologist, but instead of, like you said, what the apologist does is work in reverse, right? They have their conclusion, they work an argument to try to support that conclusion, kind of thing. But for my philosophical thing, I like to see where things lead. I like to do exercises where I go, okay, if this happens, then this, right? That's how I actually like to take an approach. I don't see like William Lane Craig do that, right? He wants to support his position for his belief, and he caters to the people that already believe. I don't think that William Lane Craig arguments, I don't think he even thinks that they're out to go convince non-believers. I think that they're there so the believer can say, hey, here's a person with credentials. He believes this, therefore I'm justified to believe it as well.
Yeah, no, I think William Lane Craig and a lot of people of his ilk are in the business of belief maintenance and belief preservation,
Yeah,
and they're
yeah.
trying to lend an air of intellectual rigor and respectability to what are really just ancient dogmas, and to get people to not worry. Oh, don't worry about what those atheists are saying. When you confront their incredulity, trust me, there's rock solid proofs of the existence of God, of the resurrection of Jesus, and all of that stuff, and the moral necessity of believing in God, and all of these kinds of things. So I think that he is really just trying to shore up.
But isn't he dishonest? I mean, don't you? He's a smart dude. He has to know
what
he's doing is dishonest. He has to know this.
Yeah. It's impossible. He doesn't realize what he's doing. He knows what he's doing, and I think he thinks that it's all for the greater good, and so he thinks it's fine.
Okay, so he's one of those people that thinks that the end justifies the means kind of thing, like a Machiavellian approach, that if he's doing a greater good, so it's lying for Jesus kind of thing.
Yeah, I don't think he would think of it. I don't think he thinks of himself that way.
No, I'm sure.
But that is in fact the kind of person that he is. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't doubt.
There was someone in the live chat that mentioned something that was interesting. I mentioned that there were these arguments, philosophical arguments for God, and someone wrote arguments, more like assertions, right? I want to say something about assertions, and assertions was sort of brought up in the Facebook post that inspired this whole discussion.
Further in a minute.
Yeah. Well, we don't have to go back to that, but assertions.
There's a couple of things. There's a couple things I want to talk about, but yeah, go ahead.
Okay. The word assertions is funny. Most people understand what an assertion is, right? To assert something is to affirm that something is true, right? So when you believe something, right, you are asserting it. You're not necessarily speaking it, right? But it is something that you could assert, right? So if I say the cat is on the mat, and I believe that to be true, when I say the cat is on the mat, I have literally asserted it out loud, okay? The content of a belief and the content of an assertion are the same. If I say the cat is on the mat, or I believe the cat is on the mat, or I think it is true that the cat is on the mat, or it is true that the cat is on the mat, those all have the same propositional content. The cat is on the mat. That's what's being asserted. So I don't have to start an assertion with the words I assert, like I assert the cat is on the mat. There's a lot of ways to assert. I can assert by saying I assert the cat is on the mat. I can also do it by saying I believe the cat is on the mat, right? It is my claim that the cat is on the mat. It is my belief that the cat is on the mat. The cat on the mat, the sentence the cat on the mat is true would be another way to do it. Or I could just say the cat is on the mat. All of those are me asserting it. Now, what gets people into trouble is that sometimes people say, oh, that's just an assertion. Right? They'll accuse a person of having said something that is just an assertion. What's relevant there is the word just, that qualifier, just. When someone says that's just an assertion, there's nothing wrong with asserting something. You can't state a fact without asserting it, right? To state a fact is to assert something to be the case, right? If you believe it to be the case. I mean, I can state a fact that I don't believe, right? I could say something that happens to be a fact that I don't believe, right? And then I'm not asserting it. I just uttered a sentence that happens to be true that I don't believe, and that I was not intending to assert it, and so I didn't assert it. I just uttered a sentence that happened to be true. But when you express something that you take to be true, that is an assertion. You're affirming it to be true. You think it is the case. But what sometimes happens, though, is people will interrupt another person and say, well, wait, that's just an assertion. Now, when they say that's just an assertion, what they're saying is you have not defended that claim. The thing that you just said, the thing you just said was true, the thing that you just assumed was a fact or whatever, you haven't argued it.
Are they claiming that you're just doing a bare assertion without argumentation for it?
Right. It's a bare assertion. So when a person says, oh, that's just an assertion, the operative word there is just. That is a bare assertion. It is an unjustified assertion. It is an unwarranted assertion. And I bring this up because it became very clear to me how endemic this is recently. And then it was really crystallized in a discussion I saw. It was Aaron Ra had a discussion with Eric Hernandez on his live stream on YouTube. Mm-hmm. He had a live stream.
Eric's going to be on here soon, by the way, too.
Yeah. Well, anyway, what happened, just the backstory, Aaron Ra debated Michael Jones, a.k.a. Inspiring Philosophy. Mm-hmm. Who's a Christian. They had a debate. And then Eric Hernandez, who was in the audience, stood up and asked a question.
I watched.
And then they had some back and forth videos to one another. And then Aaron had Eric on and they had a conversation. In the course of that conversation, Aaron said some things and Eric thought that they were unsubstantiated. And he said, well, you're just asserting that. And Aaron said, I'm not asserting anything. I don't assert things. And he was sort of going on about how he doesn't assert
He asserts things all the time.
Right. But everyone asserts things, right?
Yeah.
If I say Aaron asserted something, whether I have an argument or not, that's an assertion. An assertion is not an unjustified, unargued point. An assertion is anything where you state what the truth conditions are.
Right.
Right. So if I say this is a glass of water, I have asserted that it's a glass of water.
Absolutely.
Right. So
Aaron wouldn't say that's an assertion. If I say, here I got $1. I have $1 bill in my hand. I'm asserting that to be the case. Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
I'm asserting that. Would you say Aaron would say that's not an assertion?
Yeah, he would say that's not an assertion.
How's that not an assertion?
Because you're providing evidence. Because
so what? I'm still asserting it, but I'm giving you evidence with my assertion.
I know, but Aaron thinks that it's like the word faith for him, right? He thinks that an assertion is a bare, unwarranted assertion. He thinks that an assertion is a dirty word. He thinks an assertion is an unevidenced claim.
That leads to the same thing with belief. I hear a lot of people say belief is something along the lines, well, you believe something if you're not sure of it. Well, no.
Right.
Well, no. A lot of times people have that adversity to the word belief for that very reason, because they think it's a dirty, some odd word. I get this all the time. It's like, this is why I ask people, do you believe that I exist? Because I want them to think about that question. Because yes, okay, that's the normative thing. I believe that you exist. I have no reason to doubt you exist. I don't think you're some kind of artificial intelligence or something like that. And if somebody says no, I want to know why they think that I don't exist, because that sounds so bizarre. If you were to say, hey, Steve, do you believe that I exist? I say, hey, Ozzy, you know what? No, I don't believe that you exist. It's weird sounding, right? And I would like to know why they hold that position, but there's no rational reasons why they hold that position, except for the fact they don't want to admit that they believe that you exist because they don't like that word.
The people are allergic to the word belief in only one area that I know of, and that's people who are interested in counter-apologetics, people in the Great Debate who are opponents of the discourse of faith, as I am, right? People on this side, on this team, tend to take a dim view of the word belief, because the word belief, people will say, they'll use the word faith and belief interchangeably. They'll talk about the Christian belief or the Christian faith, right? Now, they're not talking about any particular beliefs. They're just talking about Christianity, right? The Christian faith is just Christianity. Christian belief is just Christianity, right? The word belief gets polluted. It gets associated with religiosity, right? And a lot of religious dogmas are completely indefensible. It's not that there's no argument for them. It's that the arguments are manifestly bad in some cases. Not all dogmas are badly argued, but some of them are very, very poorly defended, poorly argued. And some of them are just articles of faith, as we would say, okay? Now, so some beliefs, some religious beliefs are like that, right? And those are the ones that people who are critics of religion are right to object to. But what ends up happening is people overgeneralize the word belief, and they assume that the word belief always means an unjustified belief. Look, there's a reason why we have words like unwarranted belief, unjustified belief, unsupported belief, right? Indefensible beliefs. We have those qualifiers because we understand that not all beliefs are like that. Some beliefs are defensible. Some beliefs are well argued, well supported, justified, and warranted, right? There's all kinds of beliefs. There's warranted beliefs and unwarranted beliefs and everything in between, every degree in between. So, I mean, I believe in evolution. That's to say, I believe that the theory of evolution is correct, right? I think that's true. I think that's a correct picture of the history of life on Earth. Now, that's not to say I have some kind of blind faith and I don't have reasons for my belief, right? I do have reasons for my belief. The whole point of critical thinking and skepticism is to learn how to repudiate unwarranted beliefs and lower any confidence you have in beliefs that are not well warranted, and to acquire well warranted beliefs and raise your confidence in those that are well warranted. So you want to sort of avoid being irrational, and the way you avoid being irrational is by making sure that your beliefs are warranted and that you come to abandon your unwarranted beliefs wherever possible, and scale or apportion your confidence to the degree and quality of the evidence that you have for beliefs, right? So beliefs, I mean, it is a nonsense to say I don't believe evolution. I just accept it as a fact. That's
Yeah,
what it means to believe evolution.
that whole meme there's a whole bunch of memes that atheists use that are just as bad as the creationist memes. They're literally just as bad. And when you try to correct one, people will all of a sudden think that you're trying to run some kind of theistic narrative or something like that. And it's really been disturbing. And I see with the counter apologetics for the atheist side, and I don't know why they don't want to be corrected on it. If when you correct somebody, or when you think that you're correcting somebody, at least you have something you're asking about. I notice a lot of the and I'll use counter apologetics. The best terminology I could say for atheist activism. Oh, I got a phone going off 1 second.
Sure.
So they really are resistant to trying to take any of that on board. Obviously, especially from me, they won't even entertain that I might be right on all these things. And as you said, I try to be well researched on them. I try to provide documentation. I provide citations. I don't think that I'm coming from a perspective of being completely hosed on a lot of this stuff. So what is it about the counter apologetics people or the atheist activists that want to hold on to these narratives like belief is a bad thing, or that like you said, I don't believe evolution, I just accept it? Those kind of things to me make them look weak in the eyes of theists, because theists who are educated on these things, theists that do understand epistemology, look at somebody saying that and go, this is base level. This is somebody who just is parroting nonsense. The same way I would look at a creationist trying to argue against evolution. I don't see any distinction between the difference between them.
I think that what's going on there, this is symptomatic of the any argument will do philosophy. When people just don't care, as long as they think they can score a rhetorical point by saying I don't have beliefs, belief, that's for religion, but evolution, that can't be about belief, because belief is about religion.
But you ask them, do you believe in evolution? They say, if they say no, I don't believe in evolution. Doesn't that sound odd?
Yeah. Oh, you lack belief in evolution?
so you're saying you don't believe in evolution? That's what they're saying.
Yes, I know, but that's because they're not thinking about it. See, right. What's happening there is they think they're scoring a rhetorical point.
But they're not. They're making themselves look dumb. I'm sorry.
Yeah, but it's because they are. Yeah, they are. Now, the reason I'm talking about this, the reason I sort of mentioned this ridiculous attitude towards words like faith and belief and assertion, is that it isn't just ineffective from the standpoint of movement atheism, right? I mean, the people on the other side look at us like, what the hell? This is just the stupidest thing I've ever heard. There's an atheist running around saying he has no beliefs. That's bizarre, right? Or they're running around saying that they don't believe in evolution, right? While very obviously they do believe in evolution, they're just afraid to call it a belief. They're allergic to the word belief. What this is a superstition about language, right? This is a fear of a kind of linguistic contamination. We want to purify our side, our team. We want to expunge certain words that are polluted or contaminated by the fact that the religious are fond of using words like faith and belief and stuff like that. But this is worse than a bad strategy, right? This I see as disastrous, because it's very hard to convince people on the other side of the fence, right? So there's you've got people who are sort of very devoutly religious. We're probably not going to change their minds. But there's an awful lot of people out there that are on the fence. There's a lot of people out there that are weakly religious or inclined towards agnosticism or atheism, or some other species of non-theism. And they're just, they are there to be impressed or to be, what's the word?
But they'll look at it and go, these are bad arguments. I don't want to associate with them. They'll recognize them as bad arguments.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a person who's sort of undecided about the whole question of religion, its value, its veracity, and so forth, and someone who is running around with, repeating memes like, I don't believe in evolution, I accept the fact of evolution or something like that, they're going to look at you and go, you apparently don't even understand the nuances of the English language. Right, I'm going to trust you on these, scientific and metaphysical claims, right? So I see it as disastrous, because we discredit ourselves by repeating these stupidities, right? These are nothing but linguistic superstitions, and we have to repudiate that with both hands. Let that kind of narrow-minded rhetorical score pointing, leave that to the other people and let them discredit themselves doing that. We shouldn't be doing that, those of us who are sort of on team critical thinking or team skeptic.
And look at what it conveys. Let's say you have a fact. I think we all agree evolution is a fact. That's just, fine. But if I ask somebody, do you believe that evolution is a fact? And if they say no, I'm going to look at them like they're probably a creationist, right? Even though they might believe, evolution's a fact. They might assert that and they might know it to be true. But for some reason, they don't want to have that word belief. So when you ask them, do you believe that evolution is true? And they say no, I'm going to think that they're conveying to me that they don't accept evolution.
No, but in the next breath, it will be very clear that they do.
Right, but this is where the confusion comes in.
Yeah,
they're conveying something that they shouldn't be conveying because that's not their actual stance.
Right, but I mean, I'm not gonna hold them to that because it's very clear what their intention is. So I'm not going to hold them to their locution. I'm going to hold them to the illocution that really what they're trying to say.
I disagree. I'm going to hold when I ask somebody. And I know what you mean by this, but because I know I know they do believe it. But okay, so when I ask them, do you believe that evolution is a fact, and they say no, I know there's can I use the word infelicity there? Maybe I know. I know. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So I know there's an infelicity there, and I know what they're going for, and I know what they mean. I do know their locution, but I want them to understand it.
Yeah. Yeah, you want them to see the deductive consequences of saying, I don't believe in evolution.
That's what I'm going for when I do those conversations.
Right? Oh, you lack belief in evolution? You don't think it's true?
Right. I don't think they actually believe that, right? I know what they're trying to say. I'm trying to point out their infelicities.
Yeah, you're trying to point out that they don't believe what they're saying. They are espousing a stupidity, and if they think about it for a moment, they will recognize that this is a stupid way to talk. You should not go around saying that you don't have beliefs under the misapprehension that the word belief means a completely unsupported, blind article of faith. That is not what the word belief means, right? So, I mean, it can refer to that. It includes that, but it's not limited to that.
Right.
I just see this as people discrediting themselves. And so, people do not look like they live in the kingdom of reason when they argue this way. And that's why I'm always encouraging people to abandon that kind of talk.
But these are the people that people are looking up to as the critical thinkers because they have large followings. And I'm here to tell people, just because you have a large following does not assure or even possibly indicate that you are an exceptionally good critical thinker across the board. You might have a niche that you're really good at, but I see some of the very large name people not be the greatest critical thinkers in certain things that they're arguing for. Some of them will ask for advice. Some of them will say, okay, maybe I'm not looking this right, blah, blah, blah. But the rest of them, some of them are just adamant. They're adamant that everybody else is wrong. They're right. They haven't been corrected in years, and they're never going to be corrected on it. They just cannot be. I find that to be exactly the antithesis of what a critical thinker would be, though. It doesn't have open-mindedness.
I don't burn a lot of fuel arguing with people who I think have dug in their heels for so long and have staked a reputation on a certain maxim or something like that. I don't burn a lot of fuel trying to disabuse them of that because I don't think that
but they reach a bigger audience. So. Right,
but I talk about these things because I want other people who are not yet invested in these stupid little platitudes from becoming invested in them. I don't want people to become invested because we look ridiculous. It really is an analogy here between people who have religious dogmas and people who have I don't know what you call it, atheistic dogmas, right? I mean, there shouldn't be any dogmas in atheism.
No, but the mindset's very similar.
But yeah, exactly. There is a kind of fundamentalist mindset.
But right? I've been sounding that bill for years. You've been sounding that bill for years too.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing original in us saying this. A lot of people have said it for a long time, but it's hard to see it because very often the people who are saying these kinds of ridiculous things are arguing against people that you can't stand and who you think need to be debunked and stuff like that, and we're happy, and so we give them a pass. But I mean, you have to sort of.
Just out of curiosity, why do people spend so much time trying to discredit me, but they really don't you? And we agree on a lot of things. I don't. Maybe in the past you've had people try, but I don't.
Well, I have not been. Yeah, I don't have a very active YouTube channel now. I haven't posted a video in a long time, so I don't have too many people coming after me. But I have had. But it doesn't matter. I mean, the point is, I don't have a following. Like I don't. No one's inviting me to give talks or anything like that. I'm not part of any atheist association. I am an atheist. I describe myself as a provisional atheist, and I mean a strong atheist. I think there are no gods. I don't think any gods exist, and I have arguments and reasons why I would say that. So I'm not sort of on the fence or playing hide the ball with my beliefs in irreligiosity. And I am, under some descriptions, an anti-theist, although I don't like that label because I'm not anti-theists. I'm anti-theism.
Mm-hmm.
I think theisms in general are, on balance, are bad and would be well rid of them. So I'm as hardcore an atheist as there is out there.
Yeah, but you don't do it dishonestly. You don't do it with deceptive techniques. You don't do it with rhetoric.
Well, no, I don't think these people are being deceptive. I think that they're
maybe not willfully.
Take the case of Arnaud that I was just discussing, right? He just doesn't understand.
Yeah, I don't think he's trying to be willfully deceptive.
Yeah, he doesn't understand what an assertion is.
When it comes to him, he's just not well versed in this stuff. That's all.
Yeah. So when he hears the word faith and he hears the word belief and he hears the word assertion, there are connotations that come to mind, and he's thinking the connotation, that's the denotation, that's the exhaustive meaning. Mm-hmm. Well, no, that's just its connotation. It carries with it some negative connotations, some positive connotations. You've decided to focus on these really negative connotations and decided that the whole word is completely polluted and exhausts the denotation of the word, and that's incorrect. So I don't think that I'm being more honest than Aaron here. I think it's in this particular instance that I gave about Aaron. I think he's just not very familiar with the philosophy of language. He's not familiar with linguistics. He doesn't pay much attention to language. He thinks he's very, very precise in his definitions. He has no idea how imprecise he is.
Yeah, he thinks he's the rigorous one, which is really disturbing.
Yeah, but that's because he thinks he starts with a definition and he operates according to that definition. He doesn't realize that.
But he can be so much more powerful if he changes his approach. Aaron's a brilliant guy. I happen to like Aaron. I don't want to talk negative about him because I really respect the man. I think he does great for the community. I think he's done an incredible a service to fighting creationism, all that stuff. He could be 10 times better in these talks if he just adopted a more rigorous philosophical approach, I think.
Let me sort of, well, first of all, I want to echo everything you said there. I think that's absolutely true about Aaron. I think he's been incredibly important and incredibly invaluable in advancing movement atheism, but he's also advanced a lot of silly ideas like the whole atheism thing. I think is a mistake.
The
epistemism.
Epistemism drives me crazy. I'm like, that's just, when he uses that, he says I'm epistemist. I just think to myself, everything he's going to say afterwards is just going to be shite.
Yeah. But that's this is what happens when you subscribe to the epistemology of a philosopher such as Bionic Dance, right? She's not stupid either. She just doesn't know anything about philosophy. She doesn't know anything about epistemology. She just thinks faith is a dirty word.
I put her in the inept category beyond. And I've always said that. I have no love for BD. People know that. I think she's probably the most inept philosopher person that I've ever seen. But she has a following.
But she's not a philosopher, and I think it's foolish of Aaron to have sort of decided to take on the mantle, right? Take on this term and self-descriptor of epistemism from someone who doesn't know anything. Literally nothing.
She knows nothing about any of this stuff.
Right? But it's not that she's a stupid woman. She's not.
No, I never said that at all. But,
I know you're not saying that.
But in this area, the problem I have with Bionic Dance is I've dealt with her for many, 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 many years. She has learned nothing. She hasn't tried to edify herself. She hasn't tried to educate herself. She hasn't read anything on this stuff. That to me is somebody that I just no longer want to have a conversation with.
When people don't want to have a conversation with someone, I don't tell them that they shouldn't. It's up to them. There's some, like, as I said, there are people in the Great Debate community that I don't think I can have a productive conversation with. And I don't gainsay anyone who wants to have a conversation with them. Just because I don't think I can have a productive conversation doesn't mean anybody else can. So, if you don't think you could have a productive dialogue with her, that's great. I don't think I could either. I had one conversation with her. I've had two, actually. The first one was just a complete shit show. The second one was a little bit better, but not much better.
Oh, the one on the place was one of the greatest things I've ever seen in my life.
That was hilarious. That was hilarious.
People still talk about that. You don't even know. People still talk about that. It was bizarre. I hate to go into this sidetrack, so I'm not going to do it for very long, but I'm going to say one thing. I have never seen in my life somebody tell a linguist they don't know what words mean.
Yeah, well, she didn't say it quite that way,
It
but
pretty much, it was pretty much what it
it bordered
was.
on that. Yeah, it verged on
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
But anyway, what I was going to say was now contrast that with someone like Matt Dillahunty. So, and I know you've locked horns with him in the
I have nothing
past.
against him either. I don't know why he
Yeah,
has such a disdain for me, and he gets all my arguments wrong. Every one of his things he says about me is wrong, but I have no ill will to the guy at all. I think he's done amazing things as well.
right. But I mean, I want to sort of show him in the opposite light. Here's a guy who is not a scientist by training, but he's learned quite a bit of science. I mean, this is a guy who does counter apologetics effectively for a living. He debates
Yeah,
theists all the time.
and he's more willing to correct himself, I think.
Yeah, and he is willing to correct himself. And you can't expect a person to correct themselves on everything that one judges them to be mistaken about. But I mean, he has really upped his game, especially with respect to philosophy. And just to give you an example, he had a debate with Jay Dyer on his channel, which was mirrored on his own channel. So if you go to Matt Dillahunty or Jay Dyer's channels, you'll see a debate that they had together about tag, the transcendental argument for God's existence. Now, Matt's familiar with the tag argument. He's discussed it with other people like Matt Slick in the past. So he had a discussion with this fellow. And then Matt does these on his channel on the Atheist Debates Patreon project. On his channel, he has these debriefings after he's had a debate. He sits down and he talks to the camera.
I like the fact that he does that. I watch them
about what he did right, what he did wrong, what his opponent got right, what his opponent got wrong, how he should have proceeded, what how he prepared and stuff like that. It's very very good material for anyone who wants to get in the debating game, I think. And sometimes he'll sit down with a guest to talk about a debate and how it went, and how their debate went, or how his debate went. And in this most recent debate with Jay Dyer, afterwards he sat down with Alex Malpass, who's a philosopher from the UK, and myself, and we sat down. The three of us had a conversation about his debate with Jay Dyer, and what went right, what went wrong, and stuff like that. Here's a guy who says, well, listen, I had a debate about, really a kind of hairy philosophical argument of proof for God called the transcendental argument for God's existence. Why don't I sit down with a couple of people who have a background in philosophy and are familiar with this argument, and I'll talk it out with them, and I'll talk about debate with them and hear what they think, were the highs and lows of the debate and stuff like that. That's what we did. And that is, I mean, he's not just sort of soliciting people's advice who have some relevant expertise on an area that he's engaged in. He's doing it live on air, right? Well,
I like that. I respect him for it. I watched it and I thought the critiques were good. I had a very similar critique when I watched it. I didn't watch the whole thing, to be honest, full disclosure, but I watched some relevant parts, and I thought he goofed on the whole justification thing for induction when it comes to, he tries to use a pragmatist approach. There are some ways that I think he could have made that argument that even in your critique you didn't go into. There are some newer papers out there using a pragmatic approach to try to justify the use of induction. So it's very, very new papers, but it's beyond the scope that I could get into. But if you're interested in that, I can send it to you. But he was trying to take it as just basically, hey, it works, therefore we can justify using it, which is not Hume's problem of induction. So it doesn't justify it.
Yeah. It's funny because people are talking about induction in the live chat while we're discussing this. Here's another one. The problem of induction is something that everybody who thinks for themselves, all those who think of themselves as skeptics and critical thinkers should be familiar with the problem of induction. Right? And if you think, well, no, there's no problem with induction because that's the basis of science and ordinary practical reasoning, then you're not a skeptic and you're not a critical thinker, right? I mean, a skeptic and a critical thinker is someone who examines and questions, not things that they automatically doubt, right? No, that doesn't take any brain power at all, right? You're a skeptic and a critical thinker.
Doubt is not a virtue. Remember that. Doubt is not a virtue. No matter what anybody else tells you, doubt is not a virtue.
Yeah, well, doubt bubbles up automatically as soon as you think something is untrue. I don't have to exercise any thinking to have doubts, right? If
you don't want to strive to doubt everything.
No. Well, I think it's okay to try to doubt everything. You can't doubt everything all at once, but you can ask yourself, listen, induction. I rely on it every day of my life. Science is based on it. Let's look at it. And so if you think that there's no problem of induction, let me tell you, there's more than one problem of induction, right? There's Hume's problem of induction. There's the problem of projectable predicates. There's the Raven's paradox. There's all kinds of problems.
I love the Raven's paradox.
And so, if you're going to be interested in critical thinking and skepticism, not just bashing religion and boosting science, you might want to learn something about induction, right? I mean, it's part of the basis of critical thinking is understanding the strengths and weaknesses of what can be done with induction and deduction and abduction and so forth.
It's a little disconcerting when I see science people trying to say that the human's problem of induction is the fact that induction never is 100% conclusive like deduction. I'm like, that's not the problem.
No.
But I've heard people argue that, and it's just like, no, that's not the problem with induction.
Yeah, I had that very conversation with Aaron Ra on the Magic Sandwich Show like 4 years ago or 5 years ago. The problem of induction came up, and his sort of argument was, well, induction doesn't ensure that
that's not
the conclusion that the conclusion isn't guaranteed in an inductive argument like it is in deduction. Well, that's not the problem of induction. Everyone knows that that's what induction is. No one sees that as
inductions can't be 100% valid by quote definition. You can have a cogent argument, but it has to be greater than 50% and less than 100%. You cannot have something that's 100% inductively valid because now you have a deductive argument.
Right, yeah. So anyway, Hume's problem of induction is the most famous problem of induction. It's the problem of how you justify your trust in the use of induction. And there's basically two ways to go. You can use deduction. Well, there isn't a deductive proof of the reliability of induction. There's no logical necessity why inductions have to turn out a certain way. So there's no deductive proof of the reliability of induction. And so what's the other avenue? Well, the other avenue is to use induction. You can say, well, induction has worked in the past, so I can use induction in the future. But now what you're doing is you're relying on an induction to justify the reliability of induction. So your reliance on the reliability of induction rests on your reliance on induction. That is literally arguing in a circle, right? That's a no-no. You cannot assume the method is true in trying to establish if the method is true. So that's the problem. So then what alternative is there? How else are we to proceed, right? And does that mean that induction is just an article of faith? And or maybe, as Hume argues, there is in fact just an assumption embedded in every induction, and that is an article of faith. And so anyway, it behooves those of us who see ourselves as skeptics and critical thinkers to be familiar with these problems that are attendant upon various forms of reasoning. I mean, there's also a problem of deduction, famously. There's a problem of deduction. And there are things like falsifiability and refutability that get bandied about as a demarcation between science and pseudoscience. Well, it turns out that whole idea has fallen on hard times. Falsifiability and refutability, these are important principles. These are Popperian principles as part of the logic of scientific discovery as put forward by Karl Popper. But the idea that you can use this criterion as a neat distinction between science and pseudoscience turns out that doesn't work so well. That's been largely discredited, right? So things like that, these are the kinds of things that if you really want to think of yourself as a skeptic and critical thinker, you should look into these things, right? Just read up on them a little bit, right? And you're not going to be able to take it all in at once any more than you could take in a lot of physics or a lot of chemistry, right? You little bite sizes, you just sort of, you just gnaw at these.
That's what I've been doing for 4 years now.
Yeah. And you slowly up your game, right? And I think I brought up Matt Dillahunty because I see him as someone who is part of the atheist movement. And who is actively engaged in counter-apologetics, who I think has been upping his game. And he's a much better counter-apologist than he was years ago. Much better.
I tend to use the word skeptic. I'll use the word skeptic like you're using it, don't get me wrong. But I do reserve the right to use skeptic in more of a philosophical aspect, because skepticism is not what most people think it is, right? No,
I'm not talking about philosophical skepticism. Right. So I'm talking about...
I'm agreeing with you. I'm just saying that I do reserve that right, because I try to explain to people that the word skepticism does have it has a ton of different meanings in philosophy when you talk about Pyrrhonian skepticism or academic skepticism. And I think that that's a fascinating subject onto its own about whether we can actually have knowledge or not. Somebody had asked if you think that Christians can be rational. My position is simple. I think that anybody can be rational if they can rationally argue for their belief. If they have reasons to justify that they think are rational, then I think that most people can probably rationalize things. I don't think somebody's irrational for having a particular belief by fiat.
Well, wait. What was the question? The exact wording of the question?
Can Christians be rational for being Christian?
Oh, right. Okay. Well, the first thing to be said about that kind of question is you have to understand that a conclusion doesn't matter what the conclusion is, unless it's a flat-out self-contradiction, right? A conclusion is neither rational nor irrational. I mean, a flat-out contradiction, self-contradiction, this is a glass and it's not a glass. Okay, that's to believe that is to believe in irrationality, a piece of stupidity, a complete piece of meaningless nonsense. But to believe in a triune God of Christianity or something like that, I think is irrational. But it's not intrinsically irrational, right? I mean, it could be true, right? The fact that I think that the conclusion is false, that should never be your clue to whether or not something is irrational, or more specifically, where a person is irrational. Irrationality and rationality are predicates that need to be applied to arguments, and even more properly to people, right? A conclusion is just a conclusion. It's how you argue. Two people can arrive at the same conclusion, one with impeccable reasons, rock solid, conclusion is guaranteed, the person is rational and they've used a rational argument. Another person can have used absolutely deplorable reasoning, violated all kinds of norms of induction and deduction and so forth. They could arrive at the same conclusion, right? It could be a complete non sequitur, right? Their conclusion is irrational, not because it's false. No, the conclusion could be true. It's how you get there. So whether or not something is rational or irrational is a function of how you get there. Now, in principle, a person can have an argument that doesn't violate any of our epistemic norms. Right? It doesn't violate any norms of deduction. They have all kinds of good inductive arguments, right? And in which case their argument would be rational. That doesn't mean that their conclusion is true, and the argument could still be bad. It could be bad based on, say, a faulty premise, right? So if it's based on a faulty excuse me for a moment.
Okay.
I'll be right back.
Yeah, no problem. I can take some questions from the live chat while you're doing that. Let me read some super chats. I can get those out of the way real quick because I got them up real quick. Let's see here. Barney, Tearspell, 1000 HUF, which I don't know what that is. I know he's from Croatia, but I don't know the currency over there, dude. I should. I'm sorry. But he says the skeptic movement needs a bit of stoicism. The stoicism movement, I'm not even that familiar with, to be honest. I do know some Stoics here and there, but I would have to actually even dive into that, to be honest with you. I'm familiar with it somewhat, but I'm not a Stoic myself. But Brian Stevens says $2 inductionception. Yeah, that you can. I'm going to be using induction to justify induction, so I can say induction is justifiable. It doesn't work that way. It's a complete circular.
Yeah.
But like I said, there have been newer attempts just recently to try to come up with a justification for induction, but they used very complicated means that I didn't understand the paper. I have it somewhere, if you want to check it out. But there are some new ways approach to it, but it's using linguistic approaches. But anyways, I just read the super chats for people.
Okay.
But let's move on a little bit, because a couple things I want to get to before we sign off here about deflationary theory. One of the things I've always asked is, I think the great debate question is, does God exist? Now, I know that Dylan Hunty had an issue with that when I did a flow chat one time, which really was mind-boggling to me, because that question has been around for thousands of years. That is the question. Does God exist, right? That's the question I start with. Now, you can make it prepositional, and that either or, but the question is, there's a direct answer to that question. Yes or no. You can answer it directly. Now, you can answer it indirectly, but yes, you're a theist. No, then you're just not a theist. That's the only thing that I can deductively come from that. But when you say, I believe God exists, the way I'm looking at it is that you are saying that proposition is true. That is a state of affairs ontologically that God exists. You are, by saying, I believe God exists, the way I look at it, asserting God exists. Do you agree on that, Ozzy?
Sorry, I wasn't sure if I was muted or not.
No.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, really, it boils down to how you frame the question, right?
Yeah.
If I ask, do you believe God exists? That's a yes/no question. But that's the literal mindedness again, right? When you ask a person, do you believe this? If I say, do you believe in Bigfoot, right? And I said, no, not for a second. Would you honestly think I merely lack belief, or would you think I was saying, I think Bigfoot's bullshit?
No, I would take it as you think the picture doesn't exist. Right, exactly.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So, yes, that is a yes-no question, but that's being literal-minded. You have to consider, what is the illocutionary act? What is the intended meaning of the question? When a person says, do you believe in God? They're not asking you, are you a theist or a non-theist? They're asking you, look, do you think that God exists is true? Do you think God doesn't exist is true? Do you think that it's undecidable? Do you think it's meaningless? They want to know what your position is. Right. That's the intent of the question, right? And you can play this literal-minded game and say, well, no, I don't believe. Okay, but what if the theist were to play the reverse game, and you said, do you believe in God? And they said, well, I don't believe in the non-existence of God. I don't believe in the non-existence of God either. Now, are they both theists because they both lack a belief in the non-existence of God?
Yeah, that's an argument that so many people can't understand.
Yeah, I know.
That is one of the most difficult arguments that I have ran, that I've formalized, and I actually have a blog post on that. But I have tried to get people to understand that particular argument. They won't even take the time to stop what they're doing and try to figure out what that is meant by that, which is, again, disconcerting, because they think they think that you're saying one thing. They think that they're reading something, and they're not realizing what you're asking them. You're saying, do you have the belief in the non-existence of God? And they're like, well, no, I'm not a theist. Well, that's not what we're asking you.
Yeah. Yes or no?
They don't take the time, because, again, I think this goes to the principle of charity thing. They think you're playing a game of gotcha, or they're just being lazy. Mm-hmm. But that argument that I have used when it comes to weak theism and weak atheism being logically the same as Gnosticism is, to me, a damn bulletproof, unassailable type argument as far as the logic. I haven't seen anybody assail the logic yet. Even Stephen Hoyt tried. He said the logic's fine. But
straightforward logic, yeah.
Yeah, it's so when we're trying to relate the concept, people say, like, well, how can you have weak theism? Well, because if you're going to hold weak atheism being the same thing, I have argued that weak theism, by the negation of that proposition, if you don't allow for that, then you're special pleading. You're saying, I allow for it in this situation to say weak atheism. Anybody who doesn't believe that God exists is an atheist. Then you have to allow for the opposite of that. You have to allow for the mirroring, and that anybody who doesn't hold the belief that God does not exist would be a weak theist. Same logic, same reasoning.
Yeah, just by parity of reasoning, as we say.
Parity of reasoning. It is a parity. Yeah, it's just I call it mirroring. Yeah, parroting.
Yeah.
Or
parity.
Parity. Yeah. So you have
parity.
Of reason. Yes.
Yeah.
And so I have a lot of people that say they'll go back and they'll fall back into the denotation of it and say, oh, hey, you know what? You cannot have this because theist is defined this way. And so they're looking at the denotation that theist must be defined this way. Therefore, you cannot have weak theism, and they're not understanding the rationalized or the rational aspect of the argument or the logic of the argument. This is where I stop and say, you have to stop going back to these definitions. You have to stop going back to second grade. Here's the dictionary. Here's my argument. It doesn't work that way. When I'm trying to explain to people the weak atheism and weak theist approach, they can't go back and say, well, theism is already defined this way. But that's not the argument.
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with the argument.
Yeah, well, what's at issue is what the definition ought to be. And you're presenting an argument that shows that just as a person could define atheism as the belief that gods don't exist, and another person could define atheism as the belief or the mere lack of belief in the existence of gods. So a theist could run
exactly the same.
run that same argument and define theism either way, right? And then what would you say? Well, you'd see the problem immediately.
But they don't.
But it's the same problem in both cases. Yeah.
They don't. They're like, you just can't do that because theism already has a definition.
Yeah, well, so does atheism have a definition, and for centuries it has meant the belief that gods don't exist. So. If they want to go with that, it's not going to work very well. But anyway, so I didn't want to turn this into a discussion just about about that.
Real quick, I want to ask you about deflationary theory because I wrote in here, my name is Steve, and I believe my name is Steve. To me, seems to be representing the same thing. Now, in deflationary theory, the way I understand it, if I say something like snow is white, that's making a statement, that's making a factual statement, but it's also saying that I believe that snow is white. That there's not much difference between those two statements as far as what my locution would be. I'm stating that I believe the snow is white by merely saying snow is white. So it's in the deflationary approach. There's just not much difference that I see between them. So if I say I believe my name is Steve, and my name is Steve, what difference is there in those two statements as far as what I'm trying to make as if there's any kind of assertic force to it, or assertoric force to it, or if I'm saying an ontological claim, or in a deflationary approach, not the correspondence approach.
Right. Well, supposing you said, my name is Steve, or I'll use my case. Supposing someone says, what's your name? And I say, my name is Ozzy.
I got a spelling error I got to fix. Go ahead.
Okay. And then someone else asked me, do you believe your name is Ozzy? And I said, yes. Okay. So now in one case, I have said, my name is Ozzy. And in the other case, I have been asked, do I believe my name is Ozzy? And I said, yes. In other words, I said yes to the sentence that I believe my name is Ozzy. Okay. Or someone said, Ozzy, would you agree with this sentence? My name is Ozzy. And I would say, if you're talking about me, I'd say, yes, I believe my name is Ozzy, right? Now, what's the difference? Okay. Well, they both express the same propositional content. Mm-hmm. Okay. Exactly the same. There's no difference in that situation, right? But there are times we use the word belief in a more attenuated sense, right? There are times when we use the word belief as a qualifier where we want to weaken our conviction. And I'll say, well, yeah, I kind of believe that. Or, I believe it's like this, right? And then I'm not saying I'm fully confident of that. I'm not just asserting that
they're hedging their statement.
Yeah. I'm indicating my low degree of confidence, some mitigated confidence there, right? Now, so in principle, if I said my name is Ozzy and I believe my name is Ozzy, there could be a difference. It's possible for me to doubt what my name is, and I might say, well, maybe my name isn't Oswald. Maybe my name isn't Ozzy. It's possible, right? Maybe I'm confused. Maybe I discovered that I'm adopted, and that the people who adopted me illegally, and they just gave me a name, and it's not really my legal name. And you can imagine a scenario where you might doubt your own name, where the words "I believe my name is Ozzy" actually is intended to signal some doubt. But under normal circumstances, barring those kinds of reasons, grounds for doubting the belief, if I say I believe my name is Ozzy, that is exactly the same content as my name is Ozzy.
Yeah, I wanted to clarify that in deflationary theory, because under correspondence theory, which you started with before, there has to be some truth maker that makes the truth condition the case for that proposition.
Deflation. Hang on. Like if you're talking about Tarski's correspondence theory, yes.
This is what I said. You started with correspondence theory, where there has to be a truth maker to make the truth condition. In Tarski's semantic theories, it's completely different.
Yeah. Well, I mean, honestly, I don't.
There's many semantic theories. Tarski's semantic theory of truth is crazy. It's hard to understand. Any kind of Tarski's theories.
Yeah, I mean, we can go through it sometime if you like. It's a little weird, but okay.
Semantic theories are very difficult.
I had to teach this once, so I still have notes. I still remember how I got it across. So if you could
maybe one day, but I'm just trying to relate to people. There's different ways of looking at things. Correspondence theory and deflationary theory would be two different ways of looking at things.
Right. Yeah.
And so I wanted to make sure that in the deflationary theory I have it correct, because I kind of tend to that. Although I understand why there needs to be a truth maker for a truth condition in the correspondence theory, but it still seems to me when I say something like the snow is white, and I say I believe the snow is white, deflationary wise, they seem to be relating the exact same thing. I don't see any difference in what they're relating.
Yeah. I mean, when you say snow is white, you're asserting the truth condition of what it is you believe.
Right.
You just didn't preface it with the words "I believe." In the other case, all you did was preface what you believe with the words "I believe," right? So the surface grammar of "I believe snow is white" is different from the surface grammar of snow is white. When I say snow is white, I'm just talking about the snow. Mm-hmm. But when I say I believe snow is white, I'm talking about myself. But what I'm talking about
Is the propositional content.
is the content that the snow is white.
Yeah.
So the truth conditions are, like, when I say snow is white, there's one truth condition. Snow has to be white. Okay? When I say I believe snow is white,
the truth condition is that you believe it.
The truth condition is that I have to believe it, right?
Yeah.
But the content of what I'm talking about is still the truth condition in the other sentence, right?
See how confusing this can get, though, to the people that read the stuff.
But I mean, a person could be very, but so I mean, if you're very literal minded, you will think, well, they have different truth conditions. They cannot be meaning the same thing, right? But you have to understand how languages are used. There's two ways of saying snow is white. You can say snow is white. You can say I believe snow is white. You could also say the sentence snow is white is true, right? Or it is true that snow is white. Or it is true that I believe that snow is white. Or I believe that it is true that snow is white. And I mean, and
it is a fact that snow is white.
Or it is a fact that snow is white.
Which, by the way, I hear a lot. To me, facts are a dime a dozen. Facts and science are like the lowest. People love facts and science, but the reality is facts are the lowest thing on the hierarchy. Theories are much greater than facts because theories incorporate facts, they explain facts. Theories are ubiquitous; they're everywhere, and so facts are just they're a dime a dozen. But I like propositional things relating to facts, and we don't have time now, and you might have to kind of review it a little bit. But I like we were talking about the sense reference distinctions with Frege.
Well, yeah,
and Frege, and I find it to be very fascinating because when you look at a proposition, it's hard not to try to look at it from a sense distinction. It's hard not to say what makes this proposition true or not. What sense does it make? If there's an indexicality to it, if there's some indexical where I say like I this right, I went to school today. That can change a lot of the propositional truth value to it if you're relating to the indexical of time today for the day and myself, and I'm fascinated by that kind of stuff because it's really what does it mean to have a proposition be true or not. You can look at Russell's approach, which I know that Hoyt really loves, or you can look at it from Frege, but I don't know. I really have been diving into propositional reasoning, not so much the propositional logic because that's a lot more formal. But what makes a proposition? What makes it true? What makes it conditional? What's a singular proposition kind of thing? But anyways, I don't think I got much else in here. We didn't get a chance to look at your response. And I know we're running out of time here.
Well, I mean, I think we touched on everything that was germane in the response. We just didn't go into systematic. Yeah. I mean, the big difference, the take home message would be this. When you're talking about things like the meaning or the correct usage of words like I deny, I reject, I don't believe, things like that. I deny. I don't know if I said that one already, but in all of those cases, those are most of the time meant to be affirming the opposite.
Yeah.
Not merely a lack of belief, right?
Which I've been trying to explain for a very long time.
And the reason that is because there's a difference between direct and indirect speech acts. Now, in the case of reject and deny, I mean, most of the time, people just mean you're affirming the flat opposite of what.
But there is some nuance there. And maybe we can get in the next.
But
time. There's nuance between deny and rejection from speech act theory. Right.
Yeah. Because these things are context sensitive, right?
Yeah.
But
this is why I added in the end. This is why I made this thing at the end here that I wasn't sure if you read or not when you wrote your thing. So can I read it real quick and get your opinion?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I probably did. Yeah.
Yeah, because this deals with the assertoric force. This is the distinction between I deny and reject from Frege. I hope I pronounced that right. Geach.
Frege and Geach. Frege and Geach are two different philosophers.
Yeah, but they both agree on this particular issue. Plus, there's some other things that the Frege and Geach problems out there. But anyways, just for clarification, I said Frege and Geach reductionism approach and speech act theory. To deny P would be assert the negation. I assert P is false. Okay, so if I say I deny P, I assert P is false, which has obviously assertoric force. While to reject P would be I believe that the negation is false. The distinction being, as I understand it, is that I believe the negation is true does not carry the same assertoric force as I believe P is false as an utterance. And I believe the negation is true could be a self-assessment or autobiographical statement. While I assert P is false is not merely autobiographical. And the reason I say that is if somebody says, hey, do you believe this is true? And I say, yeah, I believe this is true. They say, why do you believe it's true? And I'm like, look, I'm just giving you my belief. I have no onus to explain this to you. I don't want to get into a long diatribe. I don't have a burden of a proof or a burden of persuasion. I'm just giving you my autobiographical assessment of my belief because we see this a lot. So if I say I believe it's true, there's a different level of at least assertoric force that I see than somebody saying, hey, you know what? I assert this to be the case. Because then I think you have a little bit more responsibility to give why you assert that to be the case. Now, that's just the way I am looking at it.
Right, but that's because these words have different connotations.
But am I completely hosed on that, or is there?
No, that makes sense. That makes sense. But see, one way to understand it is this: just the simple distinction that we've all learned in grade school between denotation and connotation, right? Words have different connotations, right? The word fact. If I say, the keys are on the table, right? And my wife says, are you sure? And I said, yes, I believe the keys are on the table. Well, now all she knows is that I believe the keys are on the table. And presumably I have a reason for that. Maybe I remember putting them there, right? But if she said, are you sure? And I said, yeah, it's a fact. Trust me, it's a fact. The keys are on the table. Well, now, right, I'm saying a little bit more than trust me, I remember seeing them. I'm saying I've taken I have some very vivid recollection, or I took measures to ensure that they were there, and there's no reason why they wouldn't be there, or they would have been moved by anyone, or anything like that. Right? Very often, when we say that something is a fact, we are trying to indicate more. Right? Part of the speech act there.
That's I was going to say, but that's more speech test, because if I say it is a fact, this be the case, or I just say this is the case,
yeah,
they really mean the same thing.
The content, no wait, hang on. The propositional content is the same, but the illocution is different.
Okay, that's right.
Right, the illocutionary force, right? The intended meaning can be different.
And that's the point I've been trying to get across. If I say the snow is white, or the fact the snow is white, propositional wise, those are saying the same thing, but illocutionary wise, I'm trying to just show people that if I say it's a fact, that it has a higher, I don't know, certitude or a higher surety, maybe.
Yeah, I know
But the reality is, to me, they still have the same propositional content, so I don't think it adds.
Propositional content, the propositional content is the same.
But you can see why I don't think it adds anything to it.
Well, it doesn't add anything to the propositional content. All it is, though, is you're saying it with greater force. You are saying it with it's a way. It's like underlining it or emphasizing it. What you're towards, it's like saying it in bold or italics.
But people
or something.
overuse that. They think that by saying they put the qualifier, "This is a fact," it somehow makes the argument stronger when it really just doesn't. I don't think.
No. Yeah, because if you say, "Look, I believe that's the case," or "It's a fact that's the case," if I'm disputing that it's the case, calling it a fact is no better than saying that you believe it, right? Because as soon as a person says, if I say, well, look, let's face it, evolution happened, and they go, oh no, I don't believe that, and I say, oh come on, it's a fact, it's a scientific fact, okay? Look, I haven't given them any reason to doubt the veracity, right? Now all I'm doing is expressing I'm expressing a degree of confidence.
Okay, but what about the keys on the table?
I take to be the fact. What's that?
If you say you believe the keys are on the table, and I ask you, Ozzy, is that a fact?
Yeah, I would say, it's a fact. The keys are on the table.
Because when you're saying that you believe the keys are on the table, to me, and again, this is just how I look at it, because the propositional content is the same. To me, you're saying that it is a fact that the keys are on the table. Now, you can be wrong on that, but
but you can be wrong either way. Right. When you claim that something is a fact,
people don't like that. You assert something as a fact. They're thinking you can say you cannot be wrong on that. That's not the same. That's a totally different thing. You can assert that there's a fact that the keys are on the table, and you can be wrong on that, right? So when people ask you, is that a fact? Yeah, I'm asserting it as a fact. I'm asserting it as the ontological state. It is my belief that now, if somebody says, well, can you prove that's a fact? Well, no, I don't think you prove any fact. But is it objective fact? That's something that is a better question. Is an objective fact? Because yes, both of us can go look to see if the keys are on the table.
Yeah, the word fact gets used in a lot of different ways. Okay, sometimes we use the word fact to mean an established fact or a demonstrable fact.
Yes.
A fact that if we were to bother to check,
scientific fact would be a case like that. Yes.
Yeah, exactly, right. Or a quickly decidable sentence like the keys are on the table. All we have to do is take a look. No, yeah, keys are on the table, right? I could turn the camera around and show you that the keys are on the table, and that would be the end of it. Okay. There's another use of the word fact, though, that's completely different. It's the notion of metaphysical fact. If I said something like, the number of blades of grass in my yard is an even number. Now, that's either true or false. Right?
Mm-hmm.
There is a fact of the matter about how many blades of grass there are in my backyard. I don't know what that number is. It's very high. In the time that it took to count the blades of grass, another blade of grass would grow and it would throw off the count. Right? So we would never know at any particular time how many blades of grass now there were, presumably. There might not be, and if that doesn't work, then you could, grains of sand on the beaches of the Bahamas or something like that, right? I mean, whatever, you can choose anything, the number of electrons in the universe. The point is there is going to be some integer that describes whatever it is, whatever class of entities you're talking about, okay? There's going to be a fact of the matter, but that's not a fact that's known to us. It's not a known fact. It might even be an unknowable fact, and that's another usage of the word fact. Another usage of the word fact is simply a state of affairs. What state of affairs? Whatever the hell the state of affairs is, right? You can refer to a state of affairs which you don't know the specific answer to. So I can refer to the number of blades of grass, right? But I don't know how many. I don't know what that number is, right? So there's different uses of the word fact. And much of the time in discussions and arguments, when people say that's a fact, what they're saying is they're convinced that the answer can be demonstrated, right? But you got to be careful. When you say that something can be demonstrated, you better be able to demonstrate it, right? It's put up or show up kind of.
But when you say it's a fact and say, well, no, it's not a fact, all people, this is, okay. There's certain things like you said, scientific fact. When you say something is a scientific fact, and I'll say the same thing, this is a scientific fact, and they'll say, well, no, it's not a fact. And you're like, well, you're just wrong because you can go verify that evolution is a scientific fact, right? I don't think there's much controversy there. When somebody says evolution is not a scientific fact, not worth my time, okay? But when you say something that could be a little bit less substantiated, like the keys are on the table, and you say, I believe the keys are on the table, it is a fact the keys are on the table. That's what I'm asserting. And somebody says, well, no, that's not a fact. Well, then both of you just arguing two different things. Why are you arguing it's a fact that it's on the table, the keys are on the table, and why is the other person arguing it's not? But they'll throw it out as it's a defeater by saying it's not a fact, by thinking it's not established by the same token of which a scientific fact would be. And I find that to be a really boring conversation, and I don't think that's a good argument to say, well, no, it's not a fact. Well, okay, but why isn't it a fact? Because they were talking about an ontological fact, something that can be determined one way or another. But they take it as a defeater because, again, they're so ingrained by scientific methodology. Which, again, I love science, you love science, but they gotta stop thinking that science is the useful method for everything.
Well, it's not a trump card, and sometimes you're talking about claims that are not amenable to scientific methodology, and so to suggest that something is a scientific fact when it's not is a mistake. But even when it is a scientific fact, I mean, if I'm arguing evolution with a creationist, it's just a waste of time to even utter the words, well, this is a fact, right? Because all I'm saying there is that it is possible to demonstrate that something is a fact by scientific means. Okay, but am I prepared to do that? Do I have? Can I actually do that? Because I know what'll happen. I'll end up going to a science textbook and say, "See," and they'll go, "Yeah, but I didn't believe that it was a scientific fact."
Me, that's all
show
you
me
got
a
to
textbook.
do. That's all you got to do. I'm sorry. I actually had a video on this years ago, back before even I really made videos, and I even said the only onus you have to demonstrate a scientific fact is to show that in the literature, this is the accepted norm for science. That's it. Because most people don't know a lot about these topics. You don't have to be an expert in biology to understand evolution, but you don't have to be an expert in it to defend it either. If somebody says this is not a fact, you can, to me, showing them this is the fact, this is the normative thing, that's acceptable defense of all this.
Well, it makes sense of why you think it's a scientific fact. You have discharged
my burden.
If your claim is merely, it is generally agreed that this is a scientific fact, right? It is a consensus.
That's what I'll argue.
Then you will have done, but you will not have convinced them that it's actually a fact.
Yeah, and I get that. But I get that. But it depends on the interlocutor I have. If somebody really wants to learn it, I'll spend more time with it. But if they're saying,
Yeah.
well, in science, this isn't a fact, and I show them here is saying that it is a fact in science, my part is done.
But imagine you're arguing with someone who's a chiropractor, and they're saying, no, subluxations, that's a real thing. Okay, and here it is in my chiropractic textbook, and I went to school, I went to a medical college, and I studied chiropractic, and here's my chiropractic textbook. Now they're going to say it's a scientific fact. Now, what's at issue there is what constitutes a scientific fact, and that's exactly what happens.
There's two types of subluxations, by the way, chiropractors.
But anyways, you know more about this than I do. Then,
I've
got
as
much as I know. But the difficulty is that it's not a great idea to just say, look, I've established this scientific fact and game over, because they don't think that they think that science is BS, right? They think that kind of science is BS. They think that that the emperor has no clothes, that this is a pseudoscience. It's like phrenology or chiropractic or something like that. They just don't believe in evolutionary theory. They think that this is really a kind of worldwide, satanically inspired conspiracy to turn people away from God and to make everyone believe that we're animals.
But what they're really saying, though, is they don't believe that science has got the fact right. They're actually just more saying that what they're saying is that the scientific fact that we believe is the case, they are arguing is not the case.
Well, they don't even think that evolution is a proper science.
Yeah, that's
right.
True.
I mean, they just think they think it's a pseudoscience, and there might be some that think it's not, but I think they all pretty much think that it's a pseudoscience, and so they'll say, yeah, there's a scientific consensus. That is, there are a lot of people who are accredited scientists who believe this, but they're in the grips of an ideology, and they're blinded by their pseudoscience. Anyway.
But anyways,
I have to get going.
Yeah, this was fun. Ozzy, again, appreciate it. We'll get you on more often when you find time. We also do Ask a Philosopher with Nick Suter, as you know, so we'll get you on with an episode with that.
That's great.
But I think this was informative. I can just tell by the live chats that they love this stuff, and I had a person message me on Facebook earlier and said this is like brain food. This is what they love, and so I appreciate it, guys. So we have Ask a Philosopher tomorrow. I'm not sure the topic. I don't remember. And we're doing Rum and Coke this Saturday. I might have Undoomed join us, and not next one, but the one after that. I got a very special guest, hopefully lined up. That was a pretty big name back in the '80s. So we'll see what happens. But anyways, guys, thanks for watching this. If you got any questions, leave them in the video description, or something not in the description, the comment section. Like, subscribe, but do all that happy horse shit stuff. Anyways, good night.
Good night.
Thank you, Ozzy. Appreciate it, man.
Cheers.
Cheers.